name is Audrey. I'm a freshman at the University of Tennessee in the design program. I'm studying interior architecture, and here in my first semester at UT, I have quite enjoyed discovering the fundamentals of architecture and also learning what makes a good design. So when my English classes discussion started morphing from the topic of homelessness and the housing crisis to the walkable city and hostile architecture, I was really into it. I had already been familiarized with the basics of this concept because in one of my lecture classes we learned about architectural determinism. Architectural determinism is design created with the intention of controlling how a person uses the space. We had a short lecture devoted to this topic, and my professor showed us some examples of this concept being utilized in a jail. She told us that architectural determinism, especially in this situation, was bad design. Period, point blank, you can't ensure that people occupying the space you've designed are going to use it in any certain way. So, when my English class read an article titled "Hostile Architecture is Evil and Should be Banned," this idea sort of came full circle. Hostile architecture is specifically aggressive architecture that is made to purposely ward off or prevent a certain action from occurring. This is a form of architectural determinism as it creates a space that forces the inhabitant to occupy it in a specific way. So, these two resources are supporting each other hand in hand. It only makes sense to go deeper into the conversation. I used the UT library databases to gather more academic sources that discuss the same negative sort of view on architectural determinism. I used these sources to write an academic position paper. The objective of this paper was to work through the 4 levels of stasis in order to ensure that we're having a productive academic discussion. So I discussed architecture in public space. I defined the difference between architectural determinism and hostile architecture, just as I did for you. And then I discussed the concept of monitoring and regulating the use of defensive urban design in general. So I wrote this paper, I submitted it, but the conversation wasn't over. I showed my mom the paper over Thanksgiving break just to show her what I had been working on, and pointed out that my paper was pretty one-sided, that I didn't think about businesses that use these forms of architecture to maintain their space. She actually grouped together with a couple of the other businesses around Old North Knoxville and petitioned to get this bus stop removed, because even though the space was only big enough for 2 people to actually sit, homeless people congregated around the bus stop. The city complied and gave them a 45-degree standing bench in its place. And that is a form of hostile architecture. So, it kind of left me torn. I just wrote this paper about we need to be working towards a better, friendlier future, and then now I have saying, no, we don't need that. So I had to open my mind a little bit. I guess my mom was cleaning up trash and biohazards, and she would run into sleeping people in the middle of the day, and it was scary. So it did improve the space. You have to think where did those dozen homeless people that hung out there go? They just lost a space. This led me to think about my research question in a little bit of a different way. I changed my perspective a little bit. I recognize now that we can't just ban hostile architecture the way Nathan Robinson proclaims in "Hostile Architecture is Evil and Should be Banned." However, we can still question if it's necessary in every situation, right? Where do we draw the line between protective forms of architecture and overly controlling deterministic designs in public? So to explore this idea, I went to 3 different areas with varying populations and varying degrees of homelessness in the surrounding areas. I observed the common types of public architecture in these spaces. The first place I went was downtown Nashville. I visited twice. Once was when I was going to look at an architecture firm, and the second time was a Titans game with my family. But both times I was just looking at the space around me and how people were able to interact with it. So the first thing that I saw was these pretty well respected spaces for pedestrians in the street, especially in like the main areas of downtown Nashville. Pedestrians are able to walk and maneuver through the space safely. However, there aren't very many like benches on the sidewalks. It's more of a get where you're going area. In a place where it's a little more leisurely, such as like these historic areas, they've put in friendly architecture. There's this stone patio looking thing, but there's a little string that says, please don't sit here, or whatever. And you know, that kind of defeats the purpose. Same with this fountain plus bench combo. I mean, it's a great idea, but they did not provide enough space. So the fountain splashes on the seats. They're all soaked. Nobody wants to sit there. Useless. So initially it comes off as pretty friendly, but if you look into it, it's disappointing. Then, you know, we have like near the stadium where there's the bridge that connects people from downtown Nashville to the stadium. There's lots of seating and trash cans along this way. It's really nice. Underneath the bridge is still like pretty impressive for the underneath of a bridge. There's some benches. You definitely can't lie down on these, but if you need to sit and take a rest, you can. So moving on from Nashville, we go to Knoxville. It's a much smaller city, you know, not as many people, but there is a large homeless population in Knoxville. So I was intrigued to see how Knoxville has adapted to this situation. I looked at Broadway in Old North Knoxville. There's a lot of small businesses and they all have tiny little benches outside. These are for customers. There's a bar in the middle, so they're not like super spacious at all, but they do provide seating on this street. It has become a much more pedestrian-friendly street. If you go a little farther down, there is Three Rivers, which is a really cute, locally owned grocery store. They have really long benches outside their store, and then across the street, there's like 3 or 4 benches. I think there's a bus stop there, or near it. Old North Knox is doing a pretty good job accommodating for the people in the area. To more suburban areas of Knoxville now, looking at some parks. I was interested to see if they are putting in structures that are going to protect against people taking advantage of the space. Old North Knoxville, where the population is really struggling with homelessness. And then a little farther out towards the river, where there aren't as many homeless people, there's not like food pantries and stuff around like there is in Old North. So there's this tiny little park in my neighborhood, and they have these pretty small green benches. They have a gazebo as well. I've never seen anybody sleeping there, so I don't think people are taking advantage of the space, but the benches honestly don't allow for it. Now, going to this bigger park that is for a wider range of people. It's just a public park. They have these friendly benches that, you know, any person of any size could sit in. People could lay down if they need. Got trash cans around. They got this one through. I went at about 6 or 7 o'clock, and it was winter, so it was dark already, but I didn't see anybody else around. With this comparison, I opened the question up to you all, the viewers. How do you feel about these examples of architecture? Are they hostile? Do they prohibit people from enjoying the space, or, using it to its full potential? Are the more public spaces being too aggressive with the decisions they make for the public by removing the option of sitting or standing or laying down? Just food for thought. Comment below if you have an interesting take on this. Thank you for listening, and bye.